We talked about baby boomers. They currently own 50% of all the wealth in the United States.
For the first time ever, 30-year-olds are making less than their parents. Houses are 2 to 4x more expensive. We basically have had no upkeep to wages. And then we have inflation eating away at our buying power. So it's real when it feels like things are more expensive.
Today's guest is Codie Sanchez.
He's an entrepreneur who's invested in over 100 companies. Now teaches millions of people how to make money and
New ways of looking at money and how to earn more in your life.
Once I buy the business, how can I actually increase the value of it?
Yeah, if you want to make more money in your business right now today, here's how we do it. First, we buy a boring Main Street business. Then we raise prices. Most small businesses' prices are underpriced. Then we typically try to do it in recession-resistant asset classes. Finally, we add technology. It's like get them off fax machines, get them off paper invoices, get them into a CRM. Most small businesses have none of that.
Basic stuff.
Very basic.
Interesting. How can people start to live a life where they're carving their own path and to stop caring what other people think?
You'll never live an incredible life sitting on the couch or the sidelines. Most of us are not doing the things in life that we need to live the life that we want. The number one indicator for if you will be a millionaire or not is...
Codie, thanks so much for coming on the show.
I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I first heard about you through Hampton. I think you know Hampton. You did a workshop there.
Yeah.
And it was kind of like, it was really like a light bulb moment for me because I started this journey of like learning more about M&A and buying businesses maybe 4 years ago. And it felt like it was like pulling teeth. It was like I had to go through like the grapevines of like Twitter, Reddit, just to find like who is the people that, because the people that are actually doing it, they rarely share this information. So when I found you, I just kind of, it was such a refreshing moment.
Thank you.
So I'm really, really excited to have you on here. But considering how hard it was for me to find all this information about gaining wealth, buying businesses, what does that tell you about the traditional education system? And is the traditional education system training us to be poor?
Yeah. I think we were sold a lot of lies about the education system. If you just look at the data today, what's happening in the university system today? Well, it's 3 to 4x in price, our generation versus our parents' generation, at a simultaneous moment of the value basically decreasing. So we make less money when we graduate, but they charge us 3 to 4x more. Huge issue. And then on top of that, we have the education systems by and large teaching us varying professions that aren't immediately applicable. And they say, if you really want to go and be in business, not only do you have to do 4 years, but you better do that MBA, which has a nice cost of, let's call it 30K on the low end and 75, 100, and 120 on the high end. We've created these like money printing machines that are universities, but they're certainly not money making for the students. They are for the universities. And a perfect case is that we've let them become hedge funds. So these universities now, even like the state universities, which didn't used to have huge pensions and endowments, now do. And so if you look at some of the largest pensions in the world that have cash, it's the university systems. And there's, that doesn't mean the university systems are bad for that. They've found an incredible way to make money. Here's the problem. Your parents' tax dollars go to those university systems. And yet, if you want to default on your university loan, you can't. It's going to follow you around for the rest of your life. And so I had a real problem with a lot of how traditional university systems work. And I had a pretty big problem with the idea that, like, why is it also that if I was to ask you, like, what do you think of somebody who sells a course online? What would you say? You'd be like, right? Because we've all kind of seen over the years the whatever that is, the scammy titles, et cetera. But I think it's deeper than that. It's that we've actually said that we only trust these institutions, which numerically do not appear to be helping us, to teach us. And we don't want to go to practitioners who have actually done the thing. We want to go to theorists and academics who have thought about potentially doing a thing and not actually done it. And so I'm pushing back pretty hard on the university system overall because, man, if I had learned M&A earlier in my career, it's not that I didn't benefit and have a lot of fun going to liberal arts school for undergrad, ASU, or going to Georgetown for grad school. I did. But do I think the ROI was worth it if I had to pay for it all? The answer is no. I went to state school and I got a grant to go to school. And for Georgetown, my business paid for it. And so otherwise, I wouldn't spend $160,000, which is what I think the executive MBA program was.
Yeah.
Right. And no shame to my alma mater. They're all playing the same game. But that's why we're building something called the Contrarian Academy. And it's all about this idea of, like, how can we democratize access to the things that really make people wealthy?
Yep.
And it's not like a Codie show. I don't even run the day-to-day academy. It's actually exactly what school should be. Office hours with experts and facilitators, ambassadors in each individual area so that people can have a commercial real estate expert in tandem with a small business sector expert. I don't know. So I often wonder, how did we get here?
Yeah, it's funny. And it's unfortunate with a lot of these business programs is because you're sold the hype, you're sold the hope of getting a job, of increasing your wage. And it's not until you actually graduate until you realize afterwards that this actually wasn't really worth it for most people. You know, Robert Kiyosaki was on the show a few years ago, and he was talking about the origins of how our current education system was built. And it was fascinating because it started in Prussia, actually, somewhere in the 1800s when Prussia lost the war to Napoleon. And what they did was they restructured their entire education system because they needed more soldiers that are obedient, disciplined, that could follow orders. And the American and Europeans actually took that model because it was so successful. And which is a little bit scary because it just means that the current education system, which still exists today to a lot of the forms, was built to build soldiers, not creators. And it was like such a fascinating moment for me to hear that. And it tells you a lot just based on what you're saying, that we need a new model. We can't really rely on this factory-built system that was meant to create soldiers.
That's fascinating. I had no idea.
Yeah,
but
I had no idea either.
And I mean, I think we also have to be honest about the fact that if right now in the US you do not have a college degree, on average you will make less money than somebody that does have a college degree. That is true. Like on average, the numbers don't lie. And if you go to a graduate business degree, on average you make more than if you only have an undergraduate degree, although not by much. Now, I think that is a little misleading though, because in the future, I do think trades, and a trade might be coding, let's say, or engineering, as opposed to a full spectrum, liberal arts degree, which we typically think of in universities, they'll actually probably make more than a 4-year grad from a traditional university system. So people on the internet always go, but you did it. What are you going to do with your kids? And I guess my point is, like, you should do whatever you want and think that is correct for you, but maybe let's go in with eyes wide open. And so at least we know we can't just expect the universities to do it all. Yeah. We better simultaneously learn a few things that could actually drive real income into our pockets. And I don't know why, but they don't teach things like the cash flow quadrant. They don't teach things like how to do acquisitions unless you go to a specific degree. And even then they teach you like how Google acquires $100 million transaction. They don't teach you how to individually at a small scale acquire it yourself.
And how much of it do you think is a lack of information? Because, with ChatGPT, Google, like you could technically get through that information. So that information is there somewhere around the web. Mm-hmm. But a lot of people are still struggling financially with their wealth. Is it really a lack of information, you think? Or do you think there's a risk appetite? Maybe perhaps people are just not wired to take certain risks, or they're just not willing to go through the information that's out there. What do you think it is? There's still a gap there, right?
That's a great point. Well, one, we do see by and large that the youth is taking less risk, right? We've seen studies that show we're getting married later, we're having less sex, we're in less committed partnerships, we're actually doing more startups, but shorter tenure of the startups. Like we start, we kind of don't continue. And less risky activities such as drinking, smoking. Some of that's good theoretically, but by and large, the difference between an adult and a child is one is allowed to take risk. Like adults, you say, no, that's your decision. You are allowed to go do that. Yeah. And if we have a nation of people who do not take risks, it is a nation of children. And so I think that is problematic. But simultaneously, it's scary, this idea of ownership. What does it mean? It means at the end of the day, whatever happens, that's on you. Can't blame anybody else. can't call anybody else late at night and try to shift what happens. Can't go back to your boss and say, meh. It's like, it's you against you. And increasingly in which we have a society where there's so many people that want to shift blame, I do imagine that drives, some people to not take ownership. But here's the problem. The number one indicator for if you will be a millionaire or not, let's say that's something that you want to be, is do you have ownership? 60% of all millionaires own a business. 60%. And it's not just enough to own the stock market, really, although that would also be great. But problematically, in the stock market today, we have a lot of people. We have one of the highest levels of individuals owning stock that we've ever had, somewhere between 60 and 80%, depending on how you splice it, own stock. Problem is, 80% of all outstanding stock is held by somewhere between the top 10 and 1%.
Wow. Yeah.
So really, the bottom 20% owns like nothing. They own no. If you're less than the top 20% of the society, so the rest of the 80%, you basically own no real amount of stock.
Yeah.
And so we don't even own stock, which would be one type of ownership, and we don't own businesses. Only 6% of Americans own a small business. In fact, Canadians own more small businesses than we do on average, 7% versus 6%. And so that's the problem. If you want to become a millionaire, you need ownership. Except we don't own anything anymore. But you know who's making up for it? Private equity. So those guys go from owning 4% of the country's businesses in 2000 to 20% by 2020. So, they drive something like they own companies that drive 6.5% of US GDP. And so we have the few owning everything. And it's not that they're evil or bad. They're not. We know these guys. I was one of them. It's just that anytime the few own everything, it never ends well. So I think people don't want to do it because they're scared of ownership, but they want to be a millionaire. They want to have freedom. They want to have more security, maybe even, with being able to earn even when they're not working. But the only way to do that is to take risk and to take action. And if you don't do that, you're going to be broke forever.
I want to get your thoughts on this. There's this thing called the Great Reset Initiative that I never know how to pronounce these. Klaus Schwab, I think is his name, the CEO of the World Economic Forum.
Yeah.
And he put out this thing after COVID, which is by 2030, he wants society to embrace this idea of not owning anything. So it's this, you will own nothing. That's like the campaign. And his whole idea is that we need a more efficient model where people shouldn't own things, they should be sharing things, taking advantage of the subscription service and the sharing economy in order to make the economy more efficient. Now, obviously, you have a lot of naysayers there, which is telling people that, this is completely against getting people to actual wealth, ownership, freedom, control, all of these things. I want to just get your take on that. When you hear something like that from the World Economic Forum founder and CEO, what's your initial take, just having been on both sides?
First take is, who owns it then? Because the typical answer is then those on high own everything. They're like, oh, you poor little peasants down there that can't figure anything out and, need to run around and let us employ you and do charity and even universal basic income. I have a lot of problem with these ideas because what they're telling you is that you are not capable, they are capable, so let them handle it for you. And anytime you've been to the DMV, you know how capable the government is. They're fucking not. And by and large, they're incredibly necessary, and we are very lucky to have all of the institutions in place we have in our democracy. It's a core part of democracy is trusted institutions and institutions that function. But they are supposed to be limited in their scope. And so, I disagree very strongly with those who think that we should let them control more and not let the private sector control more. I think that's highly problematic. Simultaneously, it's just the tragedy of the commons, which is essentially proven economic theory that goes to show that you could use real estate as an example. You have a higher depreciation rate in the value of real estate, like actual value of real estate, not taxable depreciation rate. So just how quickly the property devalues and degrades in government subsidized housing than you do in same price point, and even some cases in slightly lower price point, same build, same time frame real estate that is individually owned. Why is that? They call it the tragedy of the commons. When we all own something, what actually happens is we own nothing because we do not feel like we have skin in the game and ownership. It goes back to Nassim Taleb's famous book that talks about skin in the game. This idea that if you want to understand incentive, look at who owns some portion of the outcome. And it's, I think, also why politicians are problematic by and large, because they do not have good incentive alignment structure, right? They get more power when they spend more money in the government, because then you increase the budget of the sector that you're running, of the segment or group or committee that you're running. And so could you imagine that in business? It's like, the guys who spend the most money on my team, regardless of whether they make more money for me or not, they're actually the most powerful just because they use up their entire budget, not because they get more for the average American, or in this case, the company. It's very perverse. And so I think anytime you want change, you've got to look at the incentives.
Yeah, it sounds like the VC model, which is like spend to burn. And we saw how that turned out when the market tanked, right?
Right.
Just like ours, yeah.
Yeah, and that at least has incentive alignment, because theoretically, if I give you $1, I want some return on my dollar, or I know, because of portfolio theory, that at least 10% are going to have, 100x of the returns of the rest. And so I know that there's going to be a 90% failure rate, but I'm okay with the 10%. That could theoretically work in venture capital, except when we flood it with too much money and we stop paying attention to, normal economics.
Yeah.
Which I think is exactly what we saw, and why you've seen a decrease in IPOs, you've seen a decrease in unicorns, because they never were there in the first place.
So you mentioned the kind of the differentiation, like the differences between the generations. So what I saw was that when it comes to like talking about money, transparency, salary, Gen Z and millennials are actually pretty good from what I've seen. So it says something around 74 to 75% of millennials and Gen Z are more openly talking about salary and all of these things, compared to something like 40 to 45% of baby boomers. So we're open to talking. The younger generation is more transparent about money, yet it seems all of the ownership is still amongst the baby boomers. So where's the gap there? Like, is it good to be openly talking about money in general? What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, I never really understood why you wouldn't be able to talk about money. If I get religion and politics because you might offend somebody with very different views than theirs, okay, maybe we don't want to do that. But with money, who's offended at you becoming more successful? That's a poor societal creation if that's what we're saying. That, hey, we both kind of want this thing, but if you get it before I get it, don't like you. So I never really understood why people don't like money. I think the reason is because, by and large, we think that money is a reflection of worth. So if that's what we say. If I'm worth more, meaning I have more money, then I'm worth more than somebody else as a human. And that's actually not true. Or even this word of net worth. Words mean things. And so when we say that and then apply it to ourselves, it kind of makes sense. It's like, oh, of course I feel badly when I'm poor, because does that mean I have low worth? So we've sort of through psychology taught ourselves to not talk about it because it might make us feel less than. In my opinion, the people who have a lot of money, they don't really find their value based off worth. They might be really competitive on worth, like, I'm trying, I want to win, I want to get this game. But, if I were to lose everything right now, it'd be very difficult. Like, I would have to go through, like, psychologically a lot of issues there. And I would have, like, some component of me that was like, was that your fault? Were you a failure? But I wouldn't feel like I was worth less as a human. I would just be beating myself up that I made some poor decisions. And, like, how do I change that? And so I think we should speak about money more often. And I also don't quite understand why it is perceived as so lowbrow. Like, it shouldn't be seen as unsophisticated to talk about money. I think that's gatekeeping. And so, a lot of times when people get a lot of money, what do? They stop talking about how. They go, well, the thing is, I worked hard and I got lucky. You're like, that's not helpful. Like, how did you actually do it so that I can replicate it, or at least learn some lessons from it? And because I think actually money is all around, I'm very willing to share more about money because it seems the right thing to do. Now, I could understand not wanting to share individual net worths or how much you make in a year. That could still feels a little maybe invasive. But talking about how you got there, seems to me like gatekeeping one way or the other.
Yeah, I think you shared somewhere in an interview where you just stopped sharing your total portfolio size. You just didn't feel like it provided, like talk about that a little bit. Where was the kind of the hitting point where it's like, there's no benefit of talking about this, and where did that reasoning come from?
Yeah, I think it was right about when we hit the $100 million mark in the portfolio, and it just starts to make other people feel like it's inaccessible, I think. And so my whole mission here, why I'm willing to go online and talk about all this stuff, is because I want people to realize that, I worked a 9 to 5 for God, like 12, 13 years, really, really hard, 60-hour weeks, sometimes 70 when I was in finance. And I was a wuss, and I couldn't leave forever. And I wasn't really that comfortable taking risk. And so anybody that is stuck in that, like, I feel you, I was there. And anybody who is stuck in the startup that isn't quite working, they're not making enough money, maybe they're embarrassed about that, they can't quite figure it out, I was there. I had multiple startups that didn't work. And so that's what I want to remind people is, like, I'm right there with you. I've been there. And also, I've layered on a few things that have let me get to a place of more abundance. But I think, at some point it starts to become a pissing contest. And so, once I saw there was a lot more people online, starting to share assets under management, which is how I thought about it from being in finance, that was very normal in finance. So you would be like, hey, we run a $100 million fund. We run a $1 billion asset management company. And it sort of doesn't have the feeling it does online. And then I started seeing a lot of people pop up with that. And I was like, I think that's like just a little bit showing off at some point and not actually helping the next level of the person. So we stopped. And then the other part is sometimes your portfolio, you sell one. So then what happens? You go from 100 million to 75 or 75 to 50. And so I just felt like it wasn't very, it was a little disingenuous too. What if the numbers change, or what if they jump up hugely? Right. So I stopped. But I think on a go-forward basis, the real message here is that you don't have to leave a 9 to 5 you love in order to get ownership. You can get it inside of that business, or you can get it alongside that business by doing deals on the side. You don't have to stop your startup that you do because you love it and it's the only thing you've ever really wanted to do. You just don't have to have all the pressure on that being the only way to make money. And simultaneously, if you want to leave your job and you want to build a business, it's possible to buy it profitably first. And then finally, if you are already successful and you want to add business, if you want to grow your customers, if you want to diversify your customers, if you want to diversify the products that you sell, you can do acquisitions internal to your portfolio. And I'd like to see more of us buy small businesses than private equity buy small businesses. So that's sort of the mission. And I do think you can do it almost any level that you're at. You just don't go as big to start out. Yeah.
Let's walk through that. So you talk about in the book initially, just you have all of these amazing stats. I'm gonna kind of put this out there, which is one of the greatest wealth transfers that we're about to go into. We talked about baby boomers. They currently own 50% of all the wealth in the United States, and they own 2/3 of the businesses, and 83% are expected to change hands over the next 5 to 10 years. Walk me through why this is such a unique opportunity for people, and talk about your first business deal, like the first one you did, which I think was a laundromat.
Yeah. Well, right now we are sitting on what we call the Great Retirement, which is you're seeing the silver tsunami, the baby boomers. They are moving on. They're in their late 50s, early 60s, and they've run businesses for 10 plus years, and they have nowhere left to go. The problem is they can't just shut down the business and retire or walk away, because 90% of their net worth on average is tied up in the business. So any small business owner knows, if you're like, I do $10 million in revenue, that doesn't mean that you have $10 million, right? That means you probably have much less than that, because you are funding that thing as you go. You really get a lot of the cash when you cash out of a business. And so these baby boomers kind of can't leave. They're a little trapped, and they don't know how to sell. Most of them. Often they don't even think that they have a business that is worth selling, or think about selling their business as a sellable asset. And so they're in this perpetual employment, basically, without understanding that there's an exit ramp. And what's fascinating is, we think there are tens of millions of these businesses that will come online over this next 10-year period. But there's a real problem. We talk about that there's somewhere around, let's call it, it's very hard to get these numbers right, so we'll be very wide on ranges. People say there's somewhere between $10 and $68 trillion worth of wealth that will transfer over this next 10 to 20 year period.
Globally.
10 in the US, 68 globally. But of that 10, we think of that maybe as cash, like that might come in houses or cars or bank accounts. My supposition, my belief is that a lot of that is in businesses, that we're talking about a big chunk of that, let's call it even the $10 trillion, is in small businesses. So we will either see those assets eviscerated and not worth anything, or we will learn how to take them over in some way, shape, or form. And so that is happening all around us. I think it's the biggest wealth transfer in our lifetimes. And we're actually finally the recipients. Young people could finally be the recipients of some of the wealth, because to be frank, for millennials up to, Gen Z now, it's hard. Like if you're listening and you are that age range, on average, you're, for the first time ever, 30-year-olds are making less than their parents. So you pretty much going all the way back through the history of the US, at 30, you were always typically making more on average than your parents in this country. That's not true right now. Houses are 2 to 4x more expensive than they were for your parents on average. You also have wage stagnation. So we basically have had no upkeep to wages, even though our productivity has increased, largely due to technology, but still productivity increases. And then we have inflation eating away at our buying power. So it's real when it feels like things are more expensive. A girlfriend of mine was looking for a couch yesterday. And she's like, I went to the outlets because, I wanted to be reasonable. She's like, and I went into the restoration hardware outlet for a couch, and one was $30,000. And I was like, a $30,000 couch? That's madness. That's madness. So, there's this inflation that I think has really, really happened. And it's very present in just our food, for instance. And so we've kind of gotten the short end of the stick in a few ways. But I think that with what's coming, we can actually pair two generations that sort of don't like each other, which is baby boomers and millennial Gen Z. It's very okay boomer, and to them, and from them to us, it's stop quitting. Why are you guys whining so much? You should just work harder, right? We've got this friction between the generations. And my idea is, what if we could bring them together instead? And what if one generation's pain point, needing to retire, not having a real path, could be another generation's opportunity to take the mantle? And that's what I'm pushing for.
So if I'm a listener and I'm in my 30s or 40s and I have a job, or maybe I have some way to earn income already, I'm probably thinking, what is it about buying a business that's so interesting when I don't know anything about running a laundromat? Why can't I just invest it into the S&P, where I have historical returns of showing stable returns, or buying, real estate like my parents did? How do you walk people through that? Why is it such a good opportunity to buy a business when there's other opportunities? Yeah.
Well, one, let's compare real estate and buying a business. I think real estate's pretty incredible from a taxation standpoint, so it can help you offset taxes. But right now, the average home price in the US is $400,000. You make, if you use a traditional mortgage on that piece of real estate, about $150 to $200 a month in profit, net income, let's say.
After taxes, all the fees.
Exactly. This is if you're renting it out to somebody else. And so the problem is $150 to $200 for a $400,000 liability is not great. That's not going to make you rich. Now, what it might do is help offset taxes. It's more stable. You could theoretically pile a lot of these on. You could try to do creative financing with it, but that's still a lot of risk for not a very high income. You better have a lot of doors, like they say in real estate. Second is, let's compare it to the stock market, for instance. So the stock market, you could say, could return you 10% every year, but you need a big amount of cash to put into the stock market to get anything out of it. I'm not a big proponent of margin, but it's not like they give you margin on nothing. So if you want to make enough money to supplant your income, let's say, or even be meaningful, you better have hundreds of thousands of dollars already in the stock market, if not millions, because that 10% is going to only be as much as you have able to invest. So you have no ability to gain leverage in stocks. You have ability to gain leverage, but not a lot of income in real estate without risk. And my point is, do both of those things, but add something that's very income driving. And so I think about everything like a portfolio manager would, because I come from finance, which is, what's your asset allocation in your life? And this is like, it sounds like a very boring word, but with a business, you could go and buy a small business just like you would a house. So 10% down plus a loan. The difference is it doesn't have to be on your income. The loan can be on the business's income.
Right.
And then that business typically can, you buy profitable businesses. That's what I like to do. I don't really buy turnarounds. That's a different strategy. But you buy a business that's cash flowing. The average small business makes somewhere between 10 and 30% margins on a small business. So, if you have a business that's doing $100,000 a year in revenue, you're making $10,000 to $30,000 a year in profit. You could never do that in real estate. You couldn't even touch that with the same amount. Now, this business, will it be more work? Certainly than the stock market. You kind of just put it in the stock market and sit there. Will it be more work than real estate? Maybe, depending on how you run real estate. And is there more risk in a small business? Sure. But I sort of think about it like equity and bonds. Like, you want a bond in your portfolio to get a little bit of income, but you want equity for upside. Yeah. And if all you have is bonds, you're not going to beat inflation over time. And so that's why I think buying businesses is really interesting, because from a risk-adjusted perspective, if you're able to buy a profitable business and understand how to run it and grow it, your upside is just much higher than the stock market and real estate.
Yeah, great points. What about financing it? So take those examples of real estate and the stock market. Let's say someone saved up $100,000.
Yeah.
With real estate, you only have to put $100,000 to get a $500,000 apartment, let's say, and the bank finances that. And that's like stable. People know how to do that. With the stock market, it's liquid. That's the benefit. So you can always decide to take out that money. Whereas if I'm a listener, the business, there's a lot of, unknown risks. You can't really just sell and buy a business as easily.
Yep.
Until Biscout's going to come out, of course. But for people that, are thinking about that, how should they think about financing a business like that?
Yeah, well, I like to do creative financing. So essentially, the interesting part about small businesses is they don't have a set market like real estate and stocks. You can't go to Fidelity or Schwab and say, like, I'm going to pay you for the stock like this and like wheel your own deal. You can't do it. It's a highly, highly commoditized and processized industry. In real estate, you could go try to negotiate creative financing or seller financing, but you have a much lower likelihood. Maybe once there's massive pain in the market, you could do that more often. But by and large, that industry's become pretty commoditized. It's become pretty normalized and systematized. In small business, it's the Wild West. And so you can get as creative with buying a business as you can get the seller to agree with you on. So it really becomes helpful to become what we call a deal maker, which is, can you learn the language of money so that you can get somebody else to see the win-win in structuring creative deals?
Right.
And the nice part about buying businesses that I don't think most people realize is twofold. Say you want to go the more straightforward method. That would be like an SBA loan, where the Small Business Administration will loan you a percentage of the value of the business. So let's say that you put 10 to 20% down for a business, just like a mortgage, they will loan you the rest of it, pending, just like when you get a appraisal on a house, they will also do an evaluation on a small business. But let's say that it evaluates or it appraises appropriately, you can use the Small Business Association very similar to the house. Yeah. Now, we want to be careful about that because just like a house, you have personal guarantees, right? So you got to make sure if you're going to do your first deal, it's a good deal. Otherwise, you won't ever do one again. And so I do obsess on that. But then another way that we do most of our deals is through seller financing. It's through some aspect of, can I get this owner to see the value in our partnership and thus become the bank for me? And if the owner becomes the bank, then, we have a whole section on this financing. The graphs are really helpful in the book because, humans are visual and they're selling you their baby. And so, what I would do is I would kind of show them how it works. And I would say, here's why you would sell a business to me with seller financing. Because one, You could pay less in taxes because we defer your payments over the long term. Maybe we even do part of it as a consulting agreement. You have write-offs against the payments that we make. Do you want to pay less taxes to the IRS when you sell? Awesome. I can hook you up with that. 2, we can say we can do it faster. The average SBA loan takes 90 to 120 days. If you, Mr. Seller, are the bank, we can move quickly because we don't have an intermediary in the middle that has to come up with a bunch of documentation. And then also, because we can move fast, you can actually get the interest rate. So as opposed to the bank taking 8%, why don't you take 5%? That's 5% you would have never gotten before, and then I get to have a little bit less risk by not having as high of an interest rate. And then finally, for the purchase price, most often sellers want a higher purchase price for their business than the business may warrant. The SBA, you can't really, they go, this is what it's worth or it's not.
The SBA is the one that values it.
Yeah, well, technically the SBA has banks that it outsources all of these loans to, and then backs a percentage of the loan, which makes more banks want to offer SBA loans.
Got it.
So it's sort of like you wouldn't go directly to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to get a loan, right? But they incentivize a bunch of the mortgage companies to do so. Same thing. And so with this, you go to the seller and you say, hey, you think the business is worth $1 million. The SBA thinks it's worth $750. I'll pay you $1 million, but you seller finance me the deal over a longer time horizon. And if everything happens like you said it would in the business, I'll pay the $1 million. If actually, the business doesn't do as well as we think it does, then we go down to $750. But like, wouldn't you like the option to earn up?
Right.
And so a lot of what we're trying to teach people is like, it's very hard to become rich if you don't actually speak the language of money. And I think the language of money is deal making. And like, once you start to understand this stuff, you don't sound the same as everybody else. And making money becomes easier because you can structure it.
Yeah. And the idea of seller financing is that when someone actually cashes out, they're going to have to put the money somewhere.
Yep.
Right. And if you can guarantee a higher return than what they're currently getting, that's kind of the sell point for them to be able to do that.
Yeah. I mean, I think the sell point is really 4 things. It's, do you want to make more money? Because seller financing could do that. Do you also want to get paid an annuity, an interest rate because you're the bank? Because seller financing can do that. Do you want to move faster? Because this could take forever. And what kills most deals? Time. So you want to actually get this done or not? And then 4th, do you want to pay less to the IRS? Do you want to create a better structure for you from a taxation perspective? And if you want those 4 things, then let's talk seller financing and figure out how to do a deal where you feel taken care of. And like, I'm not going to run away with your business or fuck up your business, but also I feel more secure in buying your business because the seller always has an information advantage.
Sure.
And so we got to structure the deal in the way where it's a win-win for both parties.
Yeah. You briefly mentioned getting the first deal right. And I think that's so important. What is the right components and kind of the safety measures to ensure that people can get the first deal right? Because that's kind of what it comes down to, right? They're not going to likely do another deal if the first one doesn't work.
Yeah, well, the second segment of the book really focuses on what we call deal clarity, which I think is the most important part of the book. And it's the most important part because nobody ever talks to you about what business you should buy, what business you should go into, what you're uniquely skilled at. Like, even when we filled out those things back in the day to try to tell us what career we went after, they were so remedial, right? They didn't really try to get you to know yourself, which is why probably a lot of us don't like what we do. They say somewhere between 65 and 82% of Americans don't like their jobs. Like, that's a wild number. That's like 6 or 8 people out of 10 hate what they do every day, where they spend more time doing that than anything else besides sleeping.
Yeah,
what a tragedy. And the reason why I think that is because we don't actually know what we want, because nobody taught us how to ask the questions to get there. We don't know what we're good at, actually. And then we're probably not as willing to take the risks that we need to and do the work that we need to in order to do the thing we want to. It's like, I always, get upset at people when they say, this is what I want out of life. These are my goals. And I'm like, no, don't tell me your goals. Tell me what you're willing to sacrifice in order to get what you want. And most people don't want to sacrifice. They just want to get. And so in the beginning, we talk about deal clarity, because deal clarity is really this idea of there's no such thing as a perfect business. There's no such thing as an awful business. There's only an awful or a perfect business for you. And so, for me, if you gave me a media company that was losing money, but had a ton of subscribers that was in the finance space that, was a young-ish audience, that might be a great business for me, even if it made $0, even if it lost a ton of money, because it fits like part into my ecosystem. I just integrate the rest of the products and services we offer into it. I have more attention and eyeballs. That's actually kind of like a good deal for me. But that might be a terrible deal for my dad. He's like, what would I do with a financial media company that's losing money? What a terrible deal, right? And so lots of times on the internet, people oversimplify and they go, well, that deal's awful, or I'd never do that. And that just shows me that they don't know what they're talking about, because there's no such thing as a good deal or bad deal, just a good deal or bad deal for you. And so deal clarity is really, how do you figure out what you're good at, what you're networked in, and where you're uniquely skilled to make money, and partner that with traditional deal box investing, which is like, I want a business that's located in this area, in this sector, that makes this much money, that I have to operate it because I want to run it, but I don't have to operate it because I'm an investor. And if we pair your deal clarity worksheet and your deal box together, you're going to be, you're no longer going to be a wondering question mark, right? You're going to have more clarity. And when you have more clarity, it turns out the universe kind of gives you what you want more often. But half the time, how can it give us what we want? Because we don't even know.
Sure. So guide us through that. When you're looking at size, you mentioned industry, you want to have something that you're experienced with, something that could potentially complement some of the other businesses that you're in if you already have other businesses. But with sizing seems like a big thing as well, because number one, most people don't have all of the money to fund all of the deals to get to a certain size. And some people don't want to buy another job.
Right.
So what is like the right amount of profits, let's say, or the right valuation? Like, how should people be thinking about the numbers exactly if they don't want to buy another job, let's say?
Yeah, well, I think there's sort of like three numbers that are pretty important here. If you want to buy a business, there's three numbers that you should look at. The first number is, how much money do you actually want to put into the deal yourself? How much risk do you want to put into it? The second number is, how much money do you want to raise, take on as debt, get from seller financing? How much do you think you want? And the third is, how much money do you want to make? So we need to figure out the difference between those three, because a lot of people go, I have $10,000 I could invest. And they go, there's no way I could buy a business. I only have $10,000. I go, maybe, but do you have a bunch of rich friends, or do you know other people who want to actively invest in businesses, but maybe they don't want to do any of the work? And you do all of the work, but they backstop you, and they're kind of like, mind starts to spin. Right. And I go, or are you willing to take on some debt? Does that not scare you because you've already run a business before and you've used debt before, so that's not that scary? Or simultaneously, do you think we could get good enough at doing a deal that a seller might be talked into something where you don't use a personal guarantee and you say, hey, let's try it in this small aspect of the business. If I start growing it, let me earn into that equity. Let's do a partial revenue share deal. And so I typically think, if right now you are not going to buy a business, it's not because you don't have money, it's because you don't have knowledge. So that's why our entire business is education-based and book-based. It's like, I think you have no higher leverage activity than learning how to become a deal maker. I'm not sure there's anything else that I think over your life could make you more money. I also don't think you ever lose money learning in something like deal making. Now, you could lose money doing the thing, for sure. But so often we optimize on the things that we don't have, when what we really don't have is knowledge. And so once you have knowledge, you realize there's money all around. If you call me tomorrow with a really good deal that made sense, I could go find $1 billion. Do I have $1 billion? Absolutely not. I wish I did. My mouth to God's ears at some point. I don't have it. Yeah. But if the deal is good enough and I am good enough, eventually I could get $1 billion. And I think we have to get more people to think that way. I don't have $100,000, but if I had an investment where I think I could make more than $100,000 continuously, and it was interesting enough for people, could I go out and bring in the money? And the answer is typically yes. So you usually don't struggle from lack of money. It's lack of knowledge and lack of good deals.
Yeah, it's interesting. So, every industry has really what the business is actually in when you break it down. So for example, like e-commerce or CPG, you're selling products, physical products, but a lot of them, if not majority, they're in the acquisition game, right? They're trying to figure out how to get the most customers at the most efficient cost. You have companies like Airbnb. The business that they're really in is serving hosts. Once they have the host, the demand will come. When it comes to buying businesses, what is the real business that you're in?
The real business is really just, it's a mixture of finance and negotiation.
So deal making.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's really, can you make deals? And making deals comes down to understanding numbers at a base level. I'm talking about like, I bring in $1 and I spend 50 cents.
Okay, so I don't need to know calculus because that would not be.
I would never.
No, I'm done.
And I don't
done.
even really need to know how to do complex modeling. Like I don't need to know spreadsheets in depth, but I do need to be willing to understand a profit and loss statement.
Yeah.
And I think the other part is if somebody doesn't understand that, man, do you think you're likely to become a millionaire never understanding finances and a profit and loss statement and a spreadsheet? I live in Austin, the manifesting capital of the fucking world. You're not going to manifest millions without understanding how money is made. And that comes down to understanding a few spreadsheets. And I think we got to get over it. It's actually not that scary. Once you get into it and you have a few people kind of walking you through it and explaining, it really removes the fear. It's not like, I think we all have PTSD from calculus and algebra classes, which to this day, I don't really understand still.
Yeah.
But that is not the case with math. You can understand 1 + 1 = 2, and 6 × 2 is 12. And that's kind of all you have to understand for this.
Yeah, that's great. That's way less intimidating than I think what most people think about.
Yeah.
I think another way to help people wrap their heads around it is once I buy the business, how can I actually increase the value of it? Ideally, in a systematic way. You've bought dozens and dozens at this point. What are some of the things you've learned that have just worked over time, over and over again, to increase the value of the business so that when you buy it, maybe you just weren't the best deal maker in the first deal, you can still increase the value of the business so that you come out ahead?
Yeah, if you want to make more money in your business right now today, here's how we do it. First, we buy a boring Main Street business. Then we raise prices. Most small businesses' prices are underpriced anywhere from 30 to 300%. Then we typically try to do it in recession-resistant asset classes. So I want to have a business where it's like a plumbing business. They can continue to go even if something goes sideways. Finally, we add technology. And in adding technology in these Main Street businesses, they're very simplistic. It's like get them off fax machines, get them off paper invoices, get them off of individual phone calls, get them into a CRM. Most small businesses have none of that.
Basic stuff.
Very basic.
Interesting.
And that is the first step to increasing the revenue of your small business. Typically, that's something we do inside of the first 120 days in a business. So it's really just raise your prices and add technology. The second thing that we do inside of most small businesses is we obsess on getting people to say nice things about us, which is reviews. So in all of my businesses, I obsess on, can we get the customer to sell more for us?
You even commented on this, like that's the first thing you saw. You're okay.
Yeah, there's like a review QR code.
QR code on the TV, yeah.
Yeah, because most small businesses don't realize that a consumer will not buy from you 90% of the time if they don't have any reviews. 90% of the time, you will never get a purchase if you don't have a review. If you have one negative review, you need on average 20 to overcome the one negative review.
Wow, 1 to 20.
Right. And in small business land, people will drive up to 3 miles out of the way for a competitor if you're below 3.5 stars. So reviews are incredibly important in small business, and I obsess on those, and most small businesses do not. And it's work to do that, but it's not hard. Like it's not rocket science. It's not a new process. And so I obsess on reviews. The other thing you can do if you want to increase the revenue and profitability of your small business is when we come in, we do zero-based budgeting, which basically means we look at the business overall. We don't look at anything they spend money on right now. And we just say, what does this business really have to have? And so from a price and expense standpoint, this studio would be a great example. This studio needs to have all this podcast production gear, right? Yep. Does it need to have drinks out front that are free? No, probably not. That might come out if I do zero-based budgeting. Does it need to have 2 people staffing the podcast production thing, which is probably another high cost for them? Or would 1 be sufficient? Probably 1.
Right. The guy that's working the mic is like, oh,
fire,
shit.
Fire.
I guess today's my last day.
And so we go in and kind of look at, hey, where has this business had bloat? Because most small businesses have bloat. And on average, you don't want to come in and Like, I want to own these businesses forever. And the way you own a business forever is that you make sure it's sustainable. And so I think a lot of times people look to increase revenue first. I don't. I look to, I guess raising prices increases revenue, but I'm not looking to go get new customers. That's what most people try to do. Leads, right? How do I get new leads? How do I get new leads? Most often, if you're asking for leads in your business, that's the wrong problem in your business. You have a product business, you have a profit problem in your business, or you have an expense problem in your business. So PPE. And so that's how we think about it.
Yeah, it's interesting for me currently in an industry that's more, I guess, like AI driven, like complete opposite of boring. It's changing every day. I do get scared about disruption and all of these things, but let's take another example. Like someone has a design service agency currently, and their expertise is a design service agency. Should they not just buy another design service agency instead of a laundromat? Like what's for you, the obsession with focusing on boring kind of older businesses versus core competency?
Yeah, well, one, you should buy whatever business you think is most aligned to what we call your perfect fit business. I've never believed that Main Street businesses are better than online businesses, for instance. I own both. It's great. I think that we sometimes maybe in our online Twitter bubble, for instance, forget that like, what would my dad do with an online business? What would most Americans do to be able to increase an online agency for graphic design with AI? That's not in the standard skill set. And so when I'm talking about this, I'm kind of talking to everybody and saying, hey, if you work right now in an auto mechanic shop and you are willing to manage an auto mechanic shop, could you not own that auto mechanic shop? You absolutely could. Yeah. And so my message is more broad. And the message is also broad because, to be fair, some of our online businesses die. It's not as detrimental as our community businesses. You know, so if we have, we're on a Main Street in Austin right now. If we have all the stores and restaurants and coffee shops here owned by big conglomerates, we're going to feel it. We like lose our actual Main Street. Yeah. And so I'm passionate about not losing that because I think that would be a miserable place to live in. And we've all lived in a town or driven through a town where it just looks like a giant gas station or a freeway stop. And I don't want to live in that world, and I don't think we have to. But I think if we let private equity keep buying everything, we will. Or we won't even realize it. We won't realize that all the stores on the street are actually owned by big conglomerates. And that won't be great either. But I think you should find what your perfect fit business is. So I was just fighting with my friend Greg online on Twitter this morning, as one does. And he was basically saying this exactly. He's like, why does everybody like these boring businesses? I like these online businesses. And I gave the bond versus stock example and said they're just two different things. And also, one has existed for a lot longer than the other. So I operate on the Lindy effect, which is basically the longer something has been in existence, data tells us the more likely it is to continue. There's actually much more risk in an AI brand new startup than there is in a car wash. And you would say, that makes no sense. AI is going to take over the car washing. And you're like, maybe, but probably not for a minute. You have more volatility in the new than you have in the old when it comes to investing. And so I operate off of those two things, and I like income. I like profitable businesses. But for somebody like you or for somebody with a design agency, that's my favorite thing to do. I mean, we have something we just built for owners that's really cool, and we're testing it and working on it now, but how to do strategic acquisitions. And so I think if you look at most big companies, and you were to break down their revenue related to acquisitions, it's much higher than you think. I mean, a lot of these, I don't want to say the exact numbers because we're still combing through the data, but my assertion is it's going to be more than 50%. I think most businesses, if you have to attribute their actual revenue at some level to their acquisitions, it's the core business's ability to grow them, perhaps. But when you stack on those businesses, they compound like crazy. I mean, Amazon and Whole Foods is a great example. Yeah. Like AWS, still probably the giant driver, but it's got to be more than 30% from their acquisitions of companies like Whole Foods X, the 190 other acquisitions they've done today.
Meta buying Instagram.
100% plus WhatsApp. So I think even the big boys realize that it is the ability to compound with acquisitions is real. And a lot of people say, well, it looks like a lot of acquisitions don't work. And what my argument to that would be, one, I don't think that's true. I think M&A is very hard, and you have to make sure you don't overbuy things, meaning that the price isn't too high. But most acquisitions never get reported. Most small businesses never report buying and selling. In fact, there is nowhere to report buying and selling except through survey data. So
really?
It's a black hole. So, I, for instance, we've done hundreds of acquisitions that are intra-company acquisitions.
Yeah.
And so I think if you own a design agency today and you want to grow fast and your design agency is stable and profitable, so you're not like dying and bleeding and don't know what to do next, probably don't add an acquisition if you're in that. But if your agency is sort of stable, you've run it for a while, you understand how to run an agency, and you want to double or triple growth, some of the fastest things to do are to acquire. You can do a vertical acquisition, you can do a horizontal acquisition, so you can acquire your competitors, you can acquire your supply chain, you could also acquire new customers, just do a customer acquisition. You could do an asset acquisition, which would be just acquire, if you owned a podcast studio and this one was closing down, just acquire all the equipment from inside the podcast studio. There's so many ways to do acquisitions that cost really basically nothing. In fact, a friend of mine, Drew Sanaki, is on Twitter too, and I remember.
Did you fight with him too?
No, I didn't fight with him. I haven't invested in him a few times, so I better not. But Drew made basically a career out of buying like sort of defunct, failing, unprofitable businesses from private equity for like $1 or $10. These are big businesses, $10, $20, $30 million in revenue, and he would say, "Listen, it's not going great for you. You're losing money. I'm going to buy the business for like $1 to $10. You're going to keep some of the liabilities. I'm going to keep some of the liabilities, but I'm going to run this thing for you, and you get a percentage of the upside. So either you're failing either way. So you write it off, you take the loss, or you bet on my upside ability." And so he would buy these businesses for pennies on the dollar and grow them like crazy.
Wow. What are some other ways to get these bargains for businesses?
Yeah.
That people aren't talking about yet?
Well, yeah. One of the biggest, I'll say this. A lot of people today think, I don't have time to buy a business. I don't have time to learn how to buy a business. I want to one day, but not right now. And I think that's a terrible idea. I think we need to learn how to do it right now because businesses are going to go on sale. And we are already seeing it. We had more bankruptcies. We'll have more bankruptcies this year than we had last year in business. Every single company that shuts down in bankruptcy is losing some value of assets that we could have taken for $0 or a nominal amount. And so if you want to buy a business, you should learn immediately because stuff's about to go on sale. And so it doesn't mean you have to go buy a business now, but I can promise you one thing. Once you learn how to buy a business, you can't turn it off. You'll just see it everywhere. Like, I'm sure it's the same with you. When you go into businesses in your industry, you're probably like, same thing with the review. I'm like, well, that's interesting. I'm like, oh, look, did you guys change the wallpaper? I can't turn it off.
Yeah, your reticular activating system
it's
is
your
just
reticular
always on.
Exactly. And you get to see through the matrix. And I think if more people are able to see in the matrix, it's not more competition for me and you, actually. It's more businesses saved. And the more businesses that are saved through really creative, not expensive solutions, the more of them can grow. And then I could actually buy those businesses.
Sure.
I'm probably not going to buy one that's doing 100, a couple $100K. But if they grow it up to, $1 million, 5, 10, 20, 30, that might be a future business for me to buy.
Yep.
And so we need more of those businesses overall. Otherwise, what happens is the big guys get all the market share by default. And so when these other businesses close down, the big guys just go, okay, I get it for free. Customers for free. And that's what we really don't want.
Yeah. You advocate, along with a lot of great investors like Warren Buffett, to hold forever. And it's this just not selling. Yet when most private equity companies buy these companies or brands, their whole process is selling it. So what is the difference of how you're thinking about it versus, or how Warren Buffett thinks about it versus some of these private equity guys? Like, should you hold, and what are the pros and cons?
Well, the private equity guy, why private equity sucks the life out of companies is because they are on a timetable. The second they buy a company, the second that they take money from investors and put it into a company, the clock starts ticking. And somewhere about 7 to 10 years from that date, they need to return that money back from to investors, which means that they've actually got to take that company and do something with it. They got to make it more money. They got to try to make that thing make 10, 20, 30% per year because the investors didn't give them the money so they could just return their money back over time. They've got management fees in there. They've got the actual operating fees of the business, plus they got to have a return to the business. So they got to juice that business up. Well, it takes, I don't know, 3 to 5 years to turn around a business, to really grow a business aggressively. And then you can't just turn around and sell it the same day. It takes a couple years to sell it. So they basically got 5 years to get in there, grow this bad boy, and then start looking for the exit. Yep. And they can't even keep the business if they want to because of the way their fund docs are structured. So inherently, they juice it up. And then right about year 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, what are they doing then? They are trying to either squeeze as many of the profits out of the company as they can, or make the company as valuable as they can to sell it and get a big paycheck out of it. And so they're just incentivized differently. Not bad guys or gals at all. Just everything is incentives. We are all Pavlov's dogs, either getting a treat or getting a zap based on the things that we do. And so, so they have a weird incentive structure. Now, Warren Buffett is the opposite, right? Warren Buffett can hold stuff forever because that is his mandate. He is a holding company that is tax incentivized to continue to cash flow the way that they structured it. And his holding company has no end date. You just hold it forever and you can buy and sell the stock if you want to. But they have plenty of cash and they sit on it. And they could have shareholders that push them to use the cash in some way or the other. But by and large, he doesn't have a perverse incentive structure. So he can sit on C's candy for 10 years because he likes it. And so that's sort of the difference between the two. Now, again, I'm pretty big on I don't think anyone should do anything except I am pushy on becoming a deal maker. I think everybody should read the book. I know that's rude, I'm biased, but I think everybody should read the book and I think everybody should go through our curriculum on business buying.
Yep.
But do I think you have to buy a business? Absolutely not. I just think I've never had somebody reach out to me like, God, Codie, I wish you didn't teach me all this stuff about how to make money. That's annoying. Now I see deals everywhere. Never had that. But I do think that, you shouldn't hold a business forever if you don't want to. There are plenty of my first deals where I was like, oh, that was a great acquisition then, but it's not a good one for me now.
Why is that?
Maybe it's too small. Some of my first laundromats, I don't own them anymore. So it might have been like, oh, okay, we're going to make 50, 100, 200K per year, which is awesome. And back then I was like, I'm so rich. But today I'm like, oh, that might not be worth it with everything else that we have going on. And that's what's beautiful about businesses. Then I sell it to somebody else and it becomes their starter business, just like your starter home was somebody else's starter home. And, the other cool thing about businesses is I've sold many businesses back to their operator, like my operator who I had run the business. And I've given them the business. And I'm like, hey, we made plenty of money off this thing. This is material to you. You run this bad boy, you take it.
Wow.
Take the business and go.
No clause,
multiple
nothing.
times.
Wow, really?
Yeah, because at the end of the day, I don't have investors where I have to be their fiduciary, responsible individual. It's just me and my stuff. And so we can provide a lot of value, get a lot of value, but also give it back and make a ton of money on the way.
I should sell you some of my businesses.
Exactly. Maybe.
Careful what you wish for.
I'm open.
No, just kidding. So this idea of holding forever or selling, there's no hard or fast rules per anything, right? It's
just what do you want to do?
All your circumstances, yeah.
Yeah, the most important thing is we would probably keep taking you back to your deal clarity box. And we would say, what do you want right now? Because maybe in the beginning, you want to buy a complementary business in the AI space to achieve hypergrowth. And then you guys achieve hypergrowth, and man, this part of the business that you have is your AWS. It's growing like crazy. You're like, oh my God, I'm printing money on this thing. But this business over here, which was sort of our real estate business that housed all of our employees or whatever, it's only giving me 5% return a year, whereas the AI company is giving me 50% return a year. Well, I should probably sell that real estate and I should take the cash and put it back into here because I can make 50% here and 5 here. Right. So that's why, for instance, Amazon doesn't build its own data centers, even though Amazon has never defaulted on a data center lease since its existence. It's what do you mean? Why doesn't Amazon own all those data centers? Because they can make so much money at a faster clip doing other things.
Yeah. I often see, though, if businesses, or there's a funny story actually here, which is true, of in the 1600s of how these Dutch settlers bought Manhattan Island for like $20. Did you hear about this?
No.
It's really fascinating. So there was a bunch of Dutch settlers through the Dutch India Company, I believe. They came to Manhattan and they were trying to use Manhattan Island as a fur trading outpost. And they bought Manhattan Island from the natives. It wasn't even money. They gave them some material things that were equivalent to like $30 today in modern dollars. And I think about like a deal like that, it's like probably one of the best deals you could ever have. Eventually the English came over and they took that back, obviously. But yeah, I mean, I kind of see those deals everywhere, I feel, looking back.
Yeah, there's certainly, for instance, we just bought a piece of property, and that property, the people who needed to sell. And so we were basically able to do this transaction where they funded us this piece of land that we eventually want to turn into something else. And so we didn't do a bank transaction. We did seller financing with the land. And, that it's up a lot in, the 3 years since we bought it. So I do think you just start to look at things different. You see an empty lot, you see a building with a, for sale sign, and instead of going sad, like, oh man, what happened there? Or I wonder what they're going to do there. You just start to empower yourself to go, like, do I want to do something there? And that, I think, is really, really important. And we think about that as, like, startups have normalized that. It's like, yes, you can start a business. Here's the problem with startups. On average, you lose money for 3 years. 90% of them don't make it over any rolling 10-year period. Those that do make it, they, on average, pay the entrepreneur $40,000 to $60,000 a year, which is great salary, but not that great for all the risk you took for 3 years and probably how much money you had to plow into it. I was just at a laundromat today. I actually had sold one of our laundromats to this bigger company. And I was up there talking to them today, and they started their location. They didn't buy it. It cost them $2 million to start that location and was 9 months behind. Now, there's a couple of problems with this. Laundromats, my biggest laundromat that we ever invested in, I wasn't the full owner, I think made $3 million a year top line revenue, which means, I don't know, what were they making? Maybe $100, $150, $200, $300,000 a year profit. Well, if you put, 2.1 million in and you're only getting 300 out plus 9 months of no payment, you're in the hole pretty quick there. And so I just think as often as possible, we should use what we already have and we can build on it as opposed to thinking that it is somehow inherently better to start.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that there's no risk in any of this. There totally is. And we've got to be careful about debt. We've got to be careful of leverage. Like I always love the Warren Buffett quote. No, it was Charlie Munger who says, the most common way a man goes broke is three things: liquor, ladies, leverage. And then Buffett said, what my friend Charlie meant to say was there's only really one, called leverage. And so we have to be careful with leverage and debt, but we can also use it wisely.
Yeah. Talking about buying a business and building it up, a lot of people don't realize that Elon Musk bought Tesla. He funded Tesla. Tony Hsieh bought Zappos.
Yep.
Like these greatest entrepreneurs that we think of today for what they've built, it wasn't built from scratch, right? It was bought and then built.
100%.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think you're exactly right. And in fact, I think a lot of entrepreneurs today feel massive pressure to come up with a brilliant idea, but 60% of why startups fail is product market fit. Like you had something that you thought people wanted and they never actually wanted it. And so what if you could remove 60% of the failure rate of startups because you already have a business where there are sales that show people want the thing? You still can fail, certainly, but maybe you've decreased that likelihood because you've actually had people give you money for this thing before.
Yeah.
And so, I think it's very under-realized for sure. And like anything, when you talk about money, people start to lay emotions on top of it and go, well, it can't be that easy. You're oversimplifying it. And the truth of the matter is, anytime we're talking on a podcast, it's oversimplified for sure. But I don't think that acquisitions are easy, but they can be simple. And that is something I wish I knew when I was younger. It's like, I don't need to be a mathematician, and I don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand how a laundromat works, to be able to properly price something, and to be able to pull together dollars in order to buy something. It's like you buy anything else. You figure out if you can afford it, you figure out what the risk would be one way or the other, and then you figure out if you can run the thing. And I think we should just apply that to assets in the same way that we do liabilities.
Yeah. What about selling businesses? You know, you've bought a business, you've sold multiple businesses at this point. What are some things people should think about to ensure that a sale does go through? Because most sales don't.
Yeah.
And how can they start preparing for a sale?
Yeah, we have a whole segment in the book that I think is really useful. We call it the cash out cake. It's kind of, I like it because it gives you a visual of like tiers of a cake. So there's multiple tiers that are important to get your business sold. And the good thing about learning deal making in buying is you get in the buyer's mindset. So you're like, ooh, now I know how to talk a buyer into buying my business because I am a buyer. I understand. And so for the cash out cake, if you want to sell your business, one of the most important parts of the business overall is the same thing on the buying side, which is, is this business profitable? Does this business have like trusted financials that I can understand, where I can see if it is really profitable, historical and tax returns? Does this business have systems and processes that tell me that it's a business, not a job? So have you actually documented how this business works? Have you ever, as the owner, stepped away from the business to show that somebody else could run the business overall? The next level is, does it have a management tier? So is this a business that has talent and employees that can keep the business running, as opposed to a one-man show, which has a lot more risk?
Yeah.
You know, does the business also have a high probability of future success, as evidenced by past success? So how could you de-risk the potential for this business to fall apart? That might look things like diversified customers, not just a single point of failure. That might look like recurring revenue. So future transactions, you can almost predict when they're coming. That might look like projections that you hit over time. So here's what my historical returns looked like. Here's also what my historical projections looked like, to see how much variance or how much one was off versus the other. And there's a full process that we talk about for how to sell a business, just like how to buy a business. Because I do think business owners never think about the exit. And if you own a business right now, there will be some point in your life in which you will want to get out. I know that for sure. Every single business owner at some point will want to sell for the right price and right terms. And the only way you're going to do that and get what you want is to prep the business just like you would prep anything else for a transfer.
How long does that take usually? If
A
someone
year.
is a whole year, wow.
Yeah. I think if you want to get your best dollar for a sale for a business, a year is the right way to think about it.
And do you recommend owners to have a number in mind before they even try to get a valuation or offers?
Well, I mean, you can think whatever you want. It's just what is real. So I think, for an owner, sure, $1 billion. But I think what's more reasonable is that small businesses typically sell from anywhere from 2 to 3x profits in the sub $10 million category. In what I'll call Main Street businesses. You can also look, like we have a community, the Contrarian community, where we help people buy and sell businesses. But in there, we use an institutional data provider that can tell you what the historical returns were for businesses sold in each sector and geography and size.
Oh, wow.
So there's a lot of
That's
data
very
out there.
valuable.
Yeah, it's not cheap for us to use. I think it costs me $100K a year.
Okay.
But this helps you have a third-party valuation. You also can get a third-party evaluation, but I'd rather people start themselves, because it's, you want to be able to make sure that you believe what the person values your business at. And a lot of that is really based on profit. Like for almost all businesses, unless you have a tech business or a hyper-growth business, it's profit. And so you want to maximize your profit over the course of a year, ideally, and you want to minimize your downside risk. And we have a few really simplistic calculations on how to do that. But I can promise you, if you start early before you want to sell, then when you eventually think about selling, you'll be really happy. And also, don't get freaked out. If you don't have all this stuff in your business right now, that's totally okay. Most business owners do not. You don't have to have it to sell. It'll just help you increase the price. And also, you'll be shocked how much easier it is to run your business when you have a 13-week cash flow that you use, when you have projections, when you have budgets. Like Contrarian Thinking right now, our media business, because I didn't run it for profitability for a long time, didn't have a lot of those things. And then when I went to put in the, let's say, particular budgets for each group, which I didn't really have. I didn't know what was right to spend on media. So I said, well, we're going to spend what I think is appropriate. And then once I started to normalize how much we were spending, it's like, okay, well, now we need budgets. And let's see who does best with the money I give them, which is how I think about a budget. But in the beginning, you won't have that. And that's totally okay. Most small businesses do not.
Yeah. So I think we went through the whole timeline from starting to think about buying a business all the way to selling. I want to shift courses a little bit.
Sure.
I think it's very rare to have someone your age to be able to go from, buying your first laundromat to building a 9-figure successful business, but also this whole idea of being able to take down the Goliath of private equity and these big corporate buyers. That's a tall ask, man. I mean, I'm curious because so many people struggle with the story of money and the limited beliefs that have been taught by media, their parents. I certainly have. I didn't grow up with a lot of money. And how have you overcome that? And do you still struggle with that? Like, do you still struggle with seeing, I don't know, a billionaire and be like, I don't know if I can get there. Like, how do you get over that?
Yeah. When I was younger, well, I guess I will say this, actually. I was talking to another guy today about how some people, what's the right way to do that? Like, some people have like an insatiable drive for food. They have literally a genetic predisposition to have a higher drive towards wanting food more often, which is in some way how we can understand obesity. So you and I might have a totally different relationship with food, whereas I might be thinking about food constantly, need to eat, have a high signal to noise ratio for food. Like, I'm thinking about it constantly. You might actually say, that's not like a high desire state for me. So I actually don't think about food very much. And so for me, I think I've always been the type of person to think, I'm just going to earn more. I'm just going to make more. Money is cool. Let's make more of it. I have never been great on the downside on budgeting and saving. So I've always kind of said, I want that thing. I'm going to figure out how to earn more to make it. And so even though I didn't grow up with money, I had sort of like this irrational belief that I could make more money and that give me an opportunity to push and I'll figure it out. And I don't know if that came from athletics or my family or whatever, but that is, and I like working. So I'm like, let me work the problem and I'll figure it out. What I found is, not very many people are like that. So I think for a lot of us, we have a negative relationship with money, and we have self-worth issues tied to money. And if I could break one thing, it's that no matter what your net worth is, it has nothing to do with your value as a human. And that simultaneously, I've never met a billionaire who didn't drive massive value. I've never met a human that I thought, that idiot will never make $1. Like, I've met people that I thought they don't want to make dollars, so they won't. But I really haven't met somebody, pending like major, psychological issues, who I think is so incapable that they won't ever be able to drive some amount of monetary wealth to them. I think that's rare. I think we're actually all a little bit more capable than we think we are. And so the biggest problem is that we don't use the muscle very much. I think a lot of times what we do with money is we say, hey, I want to go learn how to play basketball. So why don't I watch a lot of stuff on basketball, and I'll think a lot about basketball, and I'll read books on basketball, and then I'll probably be good. Yeah. And it's like, instead of doing all that, do all of that, but then go practice. Get in the game. And I think that's why we structure our community the way we do, is I want people I want people to learn through case study. I want people to be together in a room, and I want people to beat up deals live, because that's you practicing. You are practicing the art of playing the game of money. And so in investing, I kind of looked at what we did in private equity, and I was like, okay, you need 3 things in private equity to be really successful and to make money. You need an investment committee that gets together at least once a week, and you take deals, and you have a group of people that say, that's bad, that's bad, that's good, that's good. What should we do next? Where are we going? Write down a list of things. You got a wet blanket in there that goes, I know that you love this deal. I'm going to play polar opposite, and you're going to try to talk me into the deal one way or the other. I'm going to talk you out of it. You need an investment committee. We don't have that in society typically. The second thing you You need somebody to help you, and it's an advisor, usually what's called a buy-side advisor. So somebody who can say, okay, here's the next step in buying the business or acquisition. Here's when you bring in your attorney. Here's when you bring in your accountant. Here's where we do the LOI stage. You have somebody that kind of holds your hand, sort of like a realtor would for real estate.
Is this also like an investment banker? Just
Exactly.
for smaller businesses?
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. It's just investment banking would be bigger.
Right.
Buy-side advisor, almost the same thing. Investment bankers wouldn't like us saying that, but yeah, for all intents and purposes. And then the third thing that you need is you need some sort of deal team. So you need a group of people that typically an accountant, an attorney, and a subject matter expert. Where, if you're going to buy a graphic design business, you have somebody who's run one before. And so I realized, okay, it's not, one, we got to get over the fear that we're not good enough with money. But then two, we just got to get reps in. And so the way we structured and designed what we created is that each week we get together with our investment committee, beat up deals. We have office hours for your buy-side advisors for you to go to them and ask them a bunch of questions. And then simultaneously, we have a deal team, which is a cohort of people that come together with you and they work through the deal with you. And then, a vendor database where you can go and get your individual accountants and attorneys if you want it. So, we kind of structured this like, how could we teach people basketball? Like, where's basketball camp? Not just... how can we create a channel about basketball? And I think we need more of that in life. And there's plenty of books and there's plenty of YouTube videos on this stuff. But I want people to get their hands dirty. That's where I think you start to make money. It's like, the best business school is business. Don't go to MBA to learn business. Take the $100K that you're going to put in your MBA and try to start something with it.
Yeah.
And watch how much more you learn.
You mentioned something interesting, which is you said the first step is to get over your fear, and then the second step is to actually start doing it. But it's funny because I feel starting to do it would actually help you get over the fear. It's like the chicken and egg thing.
You're right. I think you're right. I always struggle with you're right. I think, how do you become able to win a championship game and actually shoot the shot in a moment of stress and anxiety when it matters more than anything?
Right.
You shoot the shot 10,000 times before, where like muscle memory is just like bing, that knows how to do it. So I think you're right. It is practicing now. Because the great part is there's really two things in learning. You have the education and the implementation.
Yep.
The education, you're never going to lose money learning, right? You only lose money when you implement, when you actually do the thing. And so I'm always kind of pushing people to learn the skills needed to make money as much as humanly possible, and then be really thoughtful before you take action, because the implementation is where we have risk. It's also where all the reward is. You could educate, but if you never implement, you're never going to make money. And so it's how can we move these people through these two cycles to actually win? And I kind of obsess on this. My mom was a teacher for 30 years, special education.
Wow.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for her getting me to obsess on reading. I've always loved reading and learning. It's my most favorite thing to do. So her doing that, she never thought that would lead maybe to money. I think she thought that might lead to happiness or being a well-rounded human. But I've found it leads to both, for me at least.
Yeah, no, for sure. I've also, speaking of mothers, I've always been pulled towards very strong and independent women. And I'm curious for you because I have a lot of close girlfriends that are in business and they're trying to start their own businesses. One of the things that they mention that they struggle with oftentimes is, so I have a friend of mine, we'll name her Maria, and she has her own architecture firm. And she's oftentimes meeting clients, but what she's told me is because she wants to be taken more seriously, she felt that she needed to be more masculine in order to, be able to relate more towards some of the male clients that she's had. So she felt that over time she was losing her femininity just to be taken more seriously in the business world. Yeah. Is that something you struggle with and that you've seen other women struggle with? And how can women be in their own nature without and thrive in business as you have without losing their femininity?
I mean, the game of business is inherently masculine in a lot of ways. It's high push, right? It's pretty aggressive. There's a competitive factor to it. When it comes to money, money can be quite masculine too. It's just a driving, aggressive force. And so, there was many times in my career where I did silly things because I thought a woman had to act that way. I remember in the beginning of my career, I cut my hair like really, really short. I have very thick hair. So, I cut it real short because I thought women have bobs. Like women don't have long hair,
My friend did the same.
Right. I looked like a mushroom head. Like it was so not a good look. And then I would wear pantsuits, because women wear pantsuits when they're in business. And I remembered like, oh God, the feeling of like a bad pantsuit where it's like you're trapped in that thing. And so I did that for years and, didn't wear a lot of makeup. And I think at some point I sort of realized, oh, wait, I don't think that's actually necessary. I think I'm projecting here. And thankfully for women in our generation, we've had a lot of women before us break a lot of glass ceilings. And so these days, we don't have to be a man to win. In fact, I think we win more often when we are not that way. I think it can come off as too brash and too brusque, and it's not leaning at all into some of the things that make us uniquely women, which is, more of the mercurial nature of us, more flow, more acceptance of things, more empathy. And so, I'm sure my team would giggle if they heard me talking about empathetic Codie. But by and large, I think women have a lot of valuable things that can push us further than anybody else today. I mean, in fact, there's a lot of data now that some of the top S&P 500 executives are increasingly women, just from like a total ROI perspective, which is interesting. I also think women we shouldn't just go to other women for help. I see this a lot. Like a lot of women will come to me and say, I want to align with other strong women CEOs. And I think that's awesome. But I think they should lean in to the people who run the world right now, which is by and large dudes.
Why is it hard for women to reach out to other men?
I'm not, maybe there's lots of factors. I mean, you could have a man. If I'm single, I'm married, so it makes it a little bit easier. But if I was single and maybe I'm relatively attractive and maybe we're in the same age range, maybe the man might get the wrong idea. And so inherently, maybe we're concerned about how that might come off. Maybe we also have the flip side where the man doesn't want to engage with us because he thinks that might look poorly on him. He's married. He doesn't want to engage with that one way or another. So there's like a sexual dynamic there that could be tough. Simultaneously, it's not that normal still for us to have other high-powered opposite sex friends that we engage with frequently. Now I'm pretty lucky to have that, but I think a lot of people, if you're going to go out on a Saturday night with buddies, it might not be with women. Or if it was with women, that might not be as normal as it is to go out with other men. And so I think we hire people that are like us, which means women hire more women, men hire more men. We hang out with people that are like us, which means the same thing happens. And so because of that, there's a little bit more of a separation of church and state. That said, like my best mentors in my life were always men. And I have some good mentors that were women, but my best mentors were men. And, I think it was because a lot of times they look at you perhaps like, a daughter or somebody that they want to help up, that they hope somebody treats their daughter the same way. And I think women can really leverage that. In fact, we hurt ourselves if we come from the sexual dynamic of it. I think that's actually really hurtful to your career, and it will be forever something that lingers over top of you. And instead, really leaning into, like, do you want to help me as a colleague? Or also, hey, you have a daughter, that's incredible. I bet she wants to be high-powered when she grows up one day. I'm really striving to be like that. Can I talk to you a little bit about this? And so, and like setting the record really straight and being really firm in our boundaries is important too. But I do think, women, we got some, there's some work we've still got to do for sure a society there. And simultaneously, man, I don't think there's never been a better time to be a woman leader. And anybody that's telling you other than that is turning you into a victim.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
so I don't agree with that.
Do you know Vivian from My Rich BFF? She runs like
BFF. I do.
Yeah. Big on TikTok.
Yeah,
YouTube.
I love her stuff.
Yeah,
she's feisty.
She's
too.
feisty. Yeah, and she's been on the podcast and she was talking about how people that don't know her, obviously haters, the amount of times that she gets called a trust fund baby. And I was kind of shocked by it, obviously not being a woman, and I couldn't really attribute to what that is. Is it that like people that don't know the full story we just haven't normalized like a strong, independent woman that's successful in her young age.
Yeah. Well, I get it too.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, if you're a woman out there on the internet, don't look at the comments. Rule number
Oh, my
one,
God.
because they're weird. But you know, if you think about it, for a man, you have, so let's say 2/3 of women care if a man makes more than them. Only 1/3 of men care about women being financially independent at all. And so inherently men are trained to find value in their net worth. So when I come in and I'm a strong woman and maybe I'm kind of attractive and I also have a lot of money, what does a man see? Well, now women are competing against me as a man. Now it's not even the other men that are competing against me, it's women. And now women increasingly won't date me because they make more than I do. And on average, women don't want to date somebody who makes less money than they do, in the US at least. And so I think inherently they see us as competition. They're like, now you're saying you extra don't need us. Now women are over here taking our jobs and you're not dating us and we're more incels than ever. And, you know, we're not getting dates. And so you can't be real or fuck you. And so I actually come to it from a place of empathy, I think, actually. I've never met a man who was comfortable in his own skin and happy that was trolling a woman on the internet. And it's actually funny because I've had a few of the trolls come back to me years later, particularly on Twitter, and say like, hey, I'm really sorry. Like I was in a dark place.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, like I was in a dark place. I was struggling with my wife at the time. I was going through a divorce. And I said stuff about you publicly that I shouldn't have. And I've actually had them come back and say that to me. And after like years of like crazy commenting. And so, I don't know. I think every time there's a troll, it says way more about them than it does about me. Don't get me wrong. There are instances in which people who are well known on the internet do stupid things, and we should be chastised for it. I get that, 100%. But by and large, you know, mine that I get trust fund. I get rich husband more, maybe because I'm a little older than Vivian, which Chris, my husband, always chuckles at because he was in the military. He's like, they don't pay well. Right. So I get, you know, you must have had a rich husband.
Yeah.
And I also get, it's a lot of accomplishment negation. So, you know, you probably never owned a business. You probably never worked at Goldman Sachs. You probably never X and Y and Z. And at first that bothered me because I spent my whole career, and a lot of women do, I spent my whole career trying to gather credentials, trying to say that I was worth it, that I was good enough. It was like, all right, I didn't know if I was going to be able to afford college. So I went to Arizona State and I got a grant to do it. And then I got into the honors college because I needed to be extra special. And then I graduated a year early. And then I added 3 degrees on top. I'm sorry, I get 2 degrees and a minor. Then when I left, I went to the best finance job I could get. I got into an accelerated development program. Then I went to Goldman Sachs. Then I worked as hard as I could at Goldman Sachs until I got as far as I could. And then when I couldn't get any farther, I went to a new spot. Then there, I went to Georgetown. I got my MBA at Georgetown. I added on a PhD in Brazil at Fundação Getúlio Vargas because I wanted to add that on top of it too. You know, then I hit every single committee, et cetera, that you could ever be on.
Yeah. And
then I decided to build a business in Latin America because I wanted to add a Spanish business on top of it too. Oh, also Brazil, I should probably learn Portuguese simultaneously. I got exhausted listening to myself.
Yeah.
So I think for a lot of women, we did all of this stuff to prove that we were valuable and that we deserved to be here and like we were going to do it. And so in the beginning, when people started saying that stuff to me on the internet, it really hurt my feelings. Like it truly, embarrassingly hurt. And it still bothers me slightly to this day. More now, I'm a little healthier, so now I just am like, nah, fuck that guy.
Yeah.
But it bothers me.
I'm sure.
And so I have to get over this idea of, and I think other people should too, you should get over this idea that you have to have all these credentials. You have perfect worth as a human being. You know, I think most of us are doing the best we can out there. And if somebody else is saying something about you, it says way more about them than it does you. And I think about that often.
Yeah. It's almost them projecting the things that they did not accomplish, so they have to take it on someone else and kind of neglect the accomplishments that you've made, right?
Of course, yeah. And the other reason is lots of people punch up because it gets them more views. So I can't tell you how many people have done a negative video about me in order to steal some of the views that we have on the internet because now we get a lot of views.
Yeah.
You know, and then later I might see them somewhere or something. They're like, oh, hey, so
Bet you they don't say that in person.
Yeah, they do not.
No.
They do not, especially not in front of my husband. That wouldn't be very
Right.
smart.
Yes.
I do think more people need to be punched in the mouth. That, Like I do think by and large,
Right.
people in real life need to realize there are repercussions to actions.
Yeah.
And I think that would be healthy for society. But I'm not in the business of getting sued, so I try not to do that.
Yeah. It's like something like 70% of men they think they're more likely to win in a street fight.
So,
Until they
so
feel like
everybody thinks
pretty much everybody thinks they can win in a street fight. No one has been in a street fight, of course, from these sets.
Yeah, it's
pretty
true.
funny.
Well, and I'm sure you've seen this too, but it's so easy to throw a stone and like you kind of feel good about it. Like I remembered one time I responded to a troll and he said something rude and I kind of punched down and said something rude in return. I got a lot of views for it. And at the second that I did it, I was like, that's so unnecessary. It doesn't help anybody.
Right.
And I think we have a lot of examples in public figures, obviously, on all sides of any equation, like not even a political statement that do that. And I'm just not sure that's like good for the world. I mean, I thought it was like super. I have my candidate selection, but like watching JD Vance and Waltz have a talk where neither of them they were like pretty civil. You could say you liked one or the other, but it was like, look at two adults disagreeing, kind of still lying, kind of still, whatever, but pretty civil. And I think I've just never met very successful and happy humans who are trolls.
Yeah, agreed. You mentioned something interesting about, you said 2/3 of men wouldn't date women that earn more than them?
No, 2/3 of women. If I
women.
misspoke. Yeah, 2/3 of women won't date a man who makes less
Than them. Interesting. So obviously you're married, but I don't know if you have friends that are also high earning, successful, independent women that are single. Is it a tough time for them to find partners if they're financially successful?
Yeah, it's so interesting. Anecdotally, right now, my girlfriends who make a lot of money are struggling to find people, especially
Yeah.
later age. We're late 30s, right?
Yep.
So later in life, they make money, they were career focused, they're having a hard time finding their person. And that's what I've seen firsthand. What's interesting is the data, but maybe it's age range specific. The data that I saw recently said that the only age group that has among women that's had a easier time finding mates lately are high earning women. That actually they are winning more often. But I wonder if that's not it has to be within an age constraint.
Right.
I do think that, one of the things also about when you make more money is like you have so many options, right? Like, and so historically you dated sort of in your pool of people that are located here. My girlfriends now, they're like, I'm like, oh, you want to meet somebody in Austin? They're like, wherever. Like, I'll fly to New York. I'll fly to Monaco. I'll fly to blah, blah, blah.
Right.
So their optionality is giant.
With Instagram, you're DM away from finding anyone. It's crazy.
And I think also, your life becomes like kind of lovely when you have resources. I don't think that happiness or money buys happiness, but it sure stops a lot of misery. And so the more money you have, actually the nicer your life is. Like, I think people are lying when they tell you otherwise. I think it's a much nicer life to have like a sick bathtub at night, a great bottle of wine, your Epsom salt. You're not really worried about buying the $352 smoothie that you want, and avocados the price tag doesn't matter. I mean, it's like less stress. And so you have this kind of lovely life. Maybe you're lonely, like deep down inside, but you have a lovely life that somebody else has to fit into.
Yeah.
So I do think the older you get, the more entrenched you get in who you are. And then if you have a lot of resources, you can build kind of a lovely little moat around yourself. But, for me personally, even when I'm mad at my husband, like you couldn't believe, which like, I wish you never meet those couples and they're like, we never fight. I'm always like, really? Like never?
Yeah.
Like not once?
The rumor.
Yeah, that's not me. We definitely fight. And even when he's driving me crazy, he's my most favorite human in the world. And he's probably my biggest de-stressor because it's really hard to do all these big things by yourself. And so it's like having this foundation of a human I can trust and rely on. And like, and it's not money for him. Like that wasn't what came into it. It's that he's strong and he's a man and I feel like he can take care of me and protect me. And so I think, if you don't make a lot of money right now as a man, maybe try being strong. maybe try being like a protector for somebody. Women, I think deep down we want that.
Yep.
And or like be really funny and be fun and be like, the joy in somebody's life. And I think you could be any of those three legs of the triangle and win a lot with women.
Yeah, because that's the question, right? Is like, so there's a stat out there that now we're getting into a time where women are getting more traditional education systems, obviously not like vocational. And it tends to be that these traditional degrees allows you to earn more money.
Right.
So we're kind of entering this trend where women are going to start earning more money than men.
Yep.
So if the stats are true, and what you're saying is true, around 2/3 of women aren't willing to date men that are financially less successful, where does that break? Are we just going to have a massive single generation in our age, or do men have to level up? Do women have to set down expectations of what they need rather than financial resources? Like, where do you see this going? Because I'm fascinated about this.
Robot sex. I think, Arthur Brooks has some incredible research on this he runs the Happiness Institute at Harvard. And so I've talked to him at length about it. By and large, the data says we're going this way. We're splitting. Women are going left and men are going right in a lot of ways. And that is also true in politics. Young women increasingly progressive, young men increasingly conservative.
Yeah.
Also, young women less likely to date a conservative man. Young men more open to dating a progressive woman. So men, by and large, are slightly more open to dating outside of their particular sphere than women are. And so it's just also math that, that's not going to work long term.
Yeah.
There's anecdotal evidence, but I was talking the other day with Sean Rad, who founded Tinder, and I was asking him about, do you think that Tinder hurt us or helped us with making matches? And he was like, helped categorically, and here's why. And he really believes in the mission. And I think he's right in some ways, but where I pushed him, I was like, the problem is, on the apps, we can pick who not to engage with. And so we can, in real life, you don't go out to a bar and go, how much money do you make and are you Republican or are you a Democrat? You go, hi, I'm Codie.
Yep.
Like, you're kind of cute. I'm kind of cute. You want to get a drink? I don't know. And now in the app, we go, no, I want their political preference to be this. I want them to be this tall. I want them to be this age. I want them to make this much money or have this type of job and be located here. We're hugely prescriptive. And the problem is the data shows from Arthur's most recent book that opposites make us happier than similarities. So by and large, you want somebody that's complementary, not exactly the same. And the apps are pushing us towards sameness. And so, Chris and my husband are a perfect example. I'm that annoying woman who, like, when you say, like, what do you want for dinner? What do you want to do? I'm like, whatever. But, like, I actually don't care.
Right.
My husband cares. He cares a lot. He's like, I want this and this. I'm like, okay, great. Can I go get a glass of wine? I'm awesome. I'm along for the ride.
Yeah.
I care a lot about, like, don't overfill my weeknights. I want to, like, chill or whatever. But on the weekends, he wants to have all these activities, and I don't care what activities, so I go along. So, like, we're very, yin and yang with stuff. And I think I didn't realize how important that is in these settings. And so I hope going forward, if you're young and you haven't found your person, the question, two questions you can ask yourself. One, are you the person that you'd want to date? Do you feel like you are bettering yourself continuously in order to be a reflection of the type of human you want to date? If not, work on that. And then two, if you are that, but you feel like you aren't finding your person, the question you might ask yourself is, am I being too particular? And am I being too particular, not in like I just need to lower my standards, but in things that don't fucking matter. It doesn't matter if somebody makes more or less than you, if they're your person. What matters is, do you have a growth mindset? Does he have a growth mindset? What matters is, do you have the same core faith and values and the idea of the life that you want to create? That I never reposted that Trust Fund 6'5" video because it pissed me off. I thought, this is the dumbest shit ever, and you deserve to stay single if you believe this. It does not matter how tall somebody is. What a dumb thing to index on. It does not matter what your eye color is. And also, have you met people with trust funds? By and large, the worst. And so, I think on both sides we have to be reasonable. And don't get me wrong, it's not just women that need to be more reasonable. Men got to stop saying stupid stuff like, you have to cook and clean for me and do everything, even though you have to have a job too. That's ridiculous. Like, you shouldn't have to do that. Sure, I'll cook and clean for you if you take care of everything, pay for everything, and set me up for
Pick
life.
one.
Fine, pick one, or be equal about it. And so I think we all need to come together a little bit more. And right now I see there's a lot of clash between the sexes. And it's dumb because one of my favorite poems has a line in it that it's like, how could you hate a man or a woman? Don't you know you also are both? And if you think about it, we were born from a man and a woman into whatever we are. And when we create life, we will create life from a man and a woman. We are both very necessary. And so to hate one or the other, to dislike, to shame, to talk poorly about one or the other is to talk poorly about ourselves. And I don't think that makes much sense.
Yeah. I think we're getting the cutoff here, but final question for you, Codie, is I think one of the things that really strike when I first heard about you, and also during this conversation that we have, is that you're not afraid to carve your own path. And that takes a certain level of courage and boldness,
Thank you.
which I think a lot of people have struggles with. One of my favorite quotes from Nietzsche is, "Those who were seeing dancing in the rain were thought to be insane by those who could not hear the music." And you're really beating to your own drums by carving out this path. But for people that are struggling to care about what other people think, so they never take action or get in the relationship that they want, or break up with someone or quit that job, how can people start to live a life where they're carving their own path and to stop caring what other people think?
Yeah. Well, you'll never live an incredible life sitting on the couch or the sidelines. And so I think often in life you have to ask yourself, in order to get what I want out of life, am I doing the things necessary to get there? Most of us are not doing the things in life that we need to live the life that we want. And so I often go back and when I am not inspired to take risk, I read great risk takers. And so if you are sitting there and you are on the couch, instead of Netflix, pick up a book and read about somebody who has a life that you want. And pay attention to, yes, the ups and the downs and the beautiful, but pay attention to the sacrifices. What are the things that they did every day? When I can't write, I read something inspirational. When I can't live, I go to somebody who's lived an inspirational life.
Yeah.
Steal their homework. And I think often what you find is action can follow inspiration. And that's why podcasts like this are so important.
Beautiful advice. Thank you so much, Codie.
This was great. Thank you for having me.
Awesome.